All right, welcome everybody. My name is Scott Travis, and we're excited to be here for a second Lunch and Learn webinar of this month called Resumes, Cover Letters, and Virtual Platforms. This challenging time has got a lot of us thinking about the importance of community in our lives, and just a reminder that all of you are an important part of the Hope community for all of your life. And so today we're here for you to help out with some topics if you're in career transition or just looking to brush up on some skills during this time. First, a few housekeeping details. Please type any questions you have into the chat feature. If you have two screens or different windows going, take a minute to move them around, so you can see what you want to. Every device set up with Zoom can be a little bit different, so take a minute to get comfortable with that. We'll be using the chat for questions like I mentioned. All the resources and slides will be sent post-webinar to each of the registrants. So anything you see today that has an embedded link or a resource you want to see later, we'll get those to you. And you might have specific questions as well. Feel free to ask those like I mentioned, but we're also available to meet one-on-one. And at the end of the webinar today, we'll be talking about how you can set up an appointment for a virtual meeting with our staff during this time. So what to expect today? We're going to cover three main topics, starting with resumes, moving on to cover letters, and then sharing a little bit about virtual platform best practices. We'll stop and answer questions throughout. Let's meet our experts. First, we have Mary Ellen Kettlehut. She is a senior career advisor at Hope College in the Boerigter Center. She has over 20 years of marketing and consulting experience at global brands like Quaker Oats, Gerber, and Herman Miller. And today we're fortunate to have her as your resume coach. Next, we have Matt Atkins, who works with employers and programs in Hope's Department of Economics and Business. He has experience in higher ed, government, and is director of recruiting at a global executive search firm. And he'll use that experience today as your coach on cover letters. And finally, we have Megan Schelt as the networking coach and program manager at the Boerigter Center. She has experience within higher education as a career development professional and a varsity coach. She helps students and alumni discern meaningful work through connections and networking. And today she's your coach on making the most of some virtual career platforms. So with that, we're going to turn it over to get us started to Mary Ellen.
Let's get this going. There we go. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to sharing some tips and some pitfalls for resume writing, especially if you haven't looked at your resume in a little while and you need to spruce it up a bit. I'm going to walk through some things, and please, again, add your questions in our chat box. So overall, if you think about your resume, it's truly a reflection of your personal brand. And those of you that joined us last week learned a little bit about your personal brand, and what you bring to the world uniquely is what can show up in this marketing tool called a resume to help you position yourself for a new role. So it could be within the same organization, it could be in a new industry. Anytime you want to reposition yourself, you want to be thinking hard about what you bring that's unique. So after you do all this hard work on this resume, the sad thing is that only 30% of landing this interview you want to get is due to your resume, because recruiters only look at your resume for 6 seconds. And this is what happens when they look at your resume. This is sort of a heat map of where recruiters spend their time. So you can see anything in red or yellow is where they spend a little more of that 6 seconds. You can see sort of the top third and upper right is where recruiters are spending the most time as they're scanning your resume, deciding whether it goes in the yes pile or the no pile. So I thought this was really sort of a helpful look at sort of what happens after you do all this hard work. So let's talk about the 5 key sections that you will want to include in a professional resume. So this is post-graduation. So you'll see that your education falls to the bottom, and we're going to walk through each of these sections next. So your contact information should be up in the top of the resume, obviously. The only thing that I would say about this example I pulled is you don't need to put your street address on anymore for privacy's sake. Jessica could have just said San Francisco. So your key information for contacting you, as well as any other places you would like to send the reader. So if you have a personal website, you have a creative portfolio out there, you could go ahead and put that in. Your LinkedIn address, be sure to personalize that. Megan will talk about that. If you write a blog and you want that to be part of what they learn about you, put that up in the top section. So that'll give them some more places to go to learn about you. The next section is probably kind of new for most people if you haven't written a resume since you graduated. What we're looking for here is a quick summary, so maybe three or four lines, as you see this example at the bottom, that really focuses on what you will bring, back to those unique gifts. And if you can, try to put some keywords in from the job posting that will be a trigger for that company to know you are trying to solve their problems. And so what you're trying to do is pique curiosity with this top section. So I'll just read this one really quickly. Senior advertising professional with successful background in account management, team leadership, and promotional oversight. Capitalize on persuasive communication skills to negotiate contracts with clients. So you're hearing some specific keywords like team leadership, management, negotiate, and communication. So this is a really nice way to get someone to keep reading beyond that 6 seconds if you pique their interest with a really helpful summary. Right after the summary, you should be doing kind of a bullet list. As you can see over here, Jessica's got her skills bulleted on the left. Hard skills, things like coding, writing, maybe data analytics, things like that. Soft skills are more around the relational things that you bring to the world, whether you're adaptable, you have strong communication skills, your creative side, that kind of thing. Transferable skills is another way to think about going after this new opportunity. What can you bring with you from your prior work experience? So maybe you're really good at research, maybe you've been selling for a long time, maybe you're great at training others. So those kind of skills need a little bit of a highlight in your skills section. You can also list any certifications if you've got your CPA, for example, or if you were awarded top seller in your organization. Go ahead and put those in there. Those will jump out. And then any languages in which you're proficient, those would go there as well. So now we're going to get into the meat of the resume, which is probably the area you spend the most time preparing. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of time spent in this section as those recruiters are reviewing. So you want to be as concise as possible. And typically the way to think about that is to tell a quick story. Some of you might remember the CAR method, or some people use STAR: challenge, actions you took, and the results that you got. You also want to give a sense of scope and impact. So I put a couple of my own on here from my days back at Gerber when I was a marketing director. Our challenge was that we did some nutritional research to show how babies were doing in terms of getting key nutrients. And we wanted to put that out into the world for moms to realize that they really should keep feeding the peas longer than they normally do. And so what I wrote was that we leveraged nutritional research in a high-impact national advertising and public relations campaign. And so that's what we did, right? We had a challenge to use this data. We took action by doing this campaign. And the result was that we generated an improvement in sales. Likewise, at Herman Miller, when I led a team, we had a business strategy that we didn't really always develop because we were in the marketing department and there were business partners that we had that would generate the strategy of how we were going to go to market that year. And so our challenge was to deliver that strategy through marketing materials. And so what did I do? I led my team to deliver and develop all the marketing materials to help us get to our goals. And again, the result was we hit our $1 billion mark that year in our office furniture sales. So think about, okay, I had 30 marketing professionals. That's scope, right? I had a fairly large team. Think about impact. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but this is a really important part of your resume to make hard-hitting and concise so that you can get someone to read some of these bullet points. Lastly is education. That goes at the bottom instead of at the top now that you've been out of school for a bit. So your college or university, go ahead and keep that city and state, country, so that if it's unfamiliar to others, they know where in the world that you went to school. The month and the year you graduated. Be careful on your titles, don't abbreviate. There's so many acronyms out there that you will want to make sure that people know exactly what you were awarded. Keep your major and minor on there. And again, on GPA, it's really up to you. If it's a 3.0 or higher, you're still a student or you've just been out of school a year or two, go ahead and keep that on there if you're nice and proud of it. If not, it's not a big deal. Okay, here we go with some pitfalls. So go back thinking about the accomplishments section that we just went through where I read my examples. What we see too often is that people just write a description of what they did instead of what they accomplished or the impact that they had. So quickly, this is kind of a silly example, but I think it makes the point. The first sentence says, responsible for writing monthly newsletter, period. Okay, that's it. An accomplishment version would be created and produced a digital monthly newsletter for the International Student Center, which was delivered to 3,000 alumni and parents of the college. So again, you're seeing that little story about the scope and the impact that you had when you were responsible for writing the newsletter, but just being responsible is sort of just table stakes. I mean, you've got to talk about what you brought in terms of having an impact on that organization. Another thing to think about for the skills section, or even as you're writing your professional summary, is think about words that are more compelling. So the worst thing to say is that I'm a hardworking team player. So is everybody else that is applying for this job. So think about a word like committed instead of hardworking, for example. Get the thesaurus out and really find a way to describe yourself that's more interesting. Knowledgeable versus experienced. I think knowledgeable is a bit much to say that. Say you've got, you're experienced, you've worked in this area. Handled versus organized. Again, just kind of these generic words. You handled something doesn't tell me very much. Organized just sort of takes it to the next level. You ran a program versus you managed a program, right? So managed is just a lot stronger. I can imagine that you had people and resources involved that you had to take care of. Okay, my favorite part, which I will be honest, had to go back and do some studying myself this morning, but lead versus lead is the one that I think is the most common as in all the resumes I've read. And then I looked online and lead versus lead is absolutely the problem that people fall into. So past tense for lead is LED. It's not a heavy metal. It's LED. I led a team. I led the effort, LED. Principal versus principal. This one I think most people get right, but not always. So a principal with an LE means guidelines, rules. Principal with an AL is sort of head of your school or your organization, or sometimes people use it as an adjective to say, the principal aspects of this plan are, or the most important parts of this plan are. And my favorite, affect and effect. I just read this morning that some people just skip this whole thing and use the word impact so they don't have to deal with it. So it's up to you. But affect is an A word, an action verb. So you could say our efforts affected the outcome, right? So it's a verb. Effect is an E word for end result. So this program was effective, right? So if it gets too scary, use impact, but hopefully you don't fall into that pitfall. And then the last one on this page is just think about tense. So any job that you're currently still serving within gets a present tense use of the verbs that you have, and past tense goes with any jobs that you're no longer in. Seems pretty obvious, but people kind of forget to go back and clean up when they leave a position. Just some additional tips. There's a wonderful site that's been out for maybe 10 or 15 years now, and it's HLOOD. It is a online service that has a lot of free resume templates. So as you're looking for different formats in terms of fonts and styles, I think it's a really kind of fun place to go look, especially because they're free. They also offer guidance along the way for free on their site. A couple of things that I did borrow from them was a stat around chronological order versus functional order. I'm going to show you a functional resume in a second, but 2/3 of the HR folks out there do prefer that you put your experiences in reverse chronological order as you're going down the page. Another tip is to customize both that professional experience, professional summary, and skills section for any different jobs that you're going after. Think about prioritizing that list of skills so that it matches more cleanly with a particular job that you're going after. Gaps is always a big question. So how to handle the current situation with COVID, job loss, time off, career switches. One of the best ways to cover that is through a functional resume, which again isn't always as preferred, but if it's easier for you to demonstrate who you are and what you bring, I'm going to show you that in a second. And then length, 1 page plus is fine, but just please be concise. I mean, as you can see, you're going to have most of the readership happen on the first page. So here's that functional format. You can see again at the top, there's summary of qualifications. And then the person has made the section that usually looks like your work experience section into a skills section where they go more deeply into these abilities that they have. So you can see the sections are not the jobs, but the sections are actually the skills. Now, yes, of course, you're going to put your dates on there, and they did that at the bottom. So, you know, you can see a little bit of that disconnect here, which makes it easier for you to show off your skills. But the other thing I would say is that if you've got a gap coming up right now, for example, and we talked about this last week, but volunteer, get online, learn a skill, lots of things you can be doing with your time to demonstrate that you're trying to be productive. Couple more quick examples and then we'll be finished. So a CV is another style of resume that is used typically in academic settings if you're going for a PhD program, science, research, and it's a European standard. It typically is longer, can be up to 7 pages sometimes. So the readers of these documents know they're going to get a lot more depth in terms of taking a look at your experience. But there's just a nice, pretty example of a CV. And someone asked a question about a more artistic format for tech skills. So I kind of liked this format. Again, you get this About Me section at the top, education, skills, certifications, everything is in the top half of the layout. And then you can go into detail underneath. I think that's my last slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt. Thank you.
All righty, thank you. Let's see if I can share my screen really quick. Bear with me for a moment. All righty, so we will jump into cover letters. Thanks, Mary Ellen, for ably covering resumes. These are very complimentary. I think we all know that your cover letter should be very complimentary of the resume. It should not repeat everything in your resume, though, and it shouldn't look the exact same. So we'll talk through its purpose and some interesting ways to brand yourself and tell your story. So the first question when we talk about cover letters is, why do we make them? What's the purpose of a cover letter? We sometimes will tease students with this question too that are in some of our classes working on resumes, and we're trying to get them to say, obviously it's to get a job. And we always respond, no, it is not to get a job. The purpose of your resume and cover letter is to tell your story in an interesting way, to capture the attention of a resume reviewer, an employer, to get you an interview. And ultimately the interview is where you're gonna get your position. So This isn't some magical document that's going to get you a job. It's a document that helps tell your story in a really interesting way. So think about it that way. That's its purpose. It's a resume. The cover letter specifically is more of a resume teaser. Excuse me. What I mean by that is it's that stat that Mary Ellen shared is sort of commonly shared, and it's daunting and frankly depressing that a recruiter might only look at your resume for 6 to 8 seconds. It's like, why? I mean, why do we spend hours and hours over the course of our careers on a document that somebody's going to delete in 6 seconds? So that's the downside of it. But the flip side of it is, if you're really strategic with your resume and you're really strategic with your cover letter, what you're doing is capturing their interest so that they spend a lot more than 8 seconds looking at the resume. So one quick point too, I wanted to point out is that your cover letters are really helpful. They're most helpful, I would argue, for people that are seeking new jobs, making a career transition of some sort. And we'll talk through some examples of what that can look like. So here's some just basic things you can do with a cover letter. Let's say you don't have any relevant industry experience. You're a educator and you're looking to work in the automotive industry. So you can't put a bullet point on your resume. I guess you could, but it wouldn't be very effective to have a bullet point that says, I like cars and I've always liked cars. Not the kind of impactful accomplishment that Mary Ellen is advising us to promote on our resumes. But in a cover letter, you could actually craft something that helps show, why you might be interested in making this career transition. So here is the son of somebody that worked for Ford and relative to somebody that worked for GM, always followed the automotive industry closely. Then that's kind of a nice pivot sentence into why are you looking for this position now? For some of you, you might be interested in companies that have a really unique mission or vision, or sometimes it's nonprofit organizations, especially political organizations, where they've got sort of a defined mission and they want people that are philosophically aligned. Well, the cover letter is a great way to do that if you don't have experience in that industry specifically. So for kicks, we drafted this as somebody who's experienced the miracle of adoption, having been adopted. I'm passionate about adoption services. If you were applying for a position at Bethany Christian Services, what an awesome way and that was actually your story. That would be an awesome way to capture their attention. And I'm sure somebody would spend a lot more than 8 seconds on your resume after that. And then lastly, it can really be a way to demonstrate transferable skills too. So just like Mary Ellen was talking about with regard to that summary or objective section towards the top of a resume, and she talked about using that as a way to tell your story, but really pique their interest. This is the go-to spot within the cover letter. So working as an educator helped me hone my abilities to communicate with different audiences, and maybe even give a specific example, whether that's dealing with 5-year-olds and their parents and the different ways that you have to communicate if you're a kindergarten teacher, or maybe it's having to calm down and communicate and manage expectations with parents that think their child is the most gifted child to ever grace the earth, and how you're building relationships with people like that. You could make a very strong case that would translate well into a sales or account management position, or maybe it's the analytics experience that you get managing a classroom with 20 to 30 students. So anyway, you can see where we're going with it. The cover letter is a great way to start showing those transferable skills and why you're relevant. Some basic do's and don'ts. It really should be a one-page cover letter. There's nothing more. The resume, I think, I totally agree with Mary Ellen. It's okay to be a page plus, especially if it's really impactful, important information. The cover letter, though, is just the nature of the document. It's in paragraph form. It's wordy. If you've got more than a page, it means you've probably got 6 to 8 paragraphs. It means each paragraph is probably 6 sentences or longer. That's a daunting document that nobody wants to read. So it really should be a one-page cover letter. One nice trick I've seen some people use is use the same header as the resume. So just like we were looking at the example resume where you don't need your address anymore, just put San Francisco or West Holland, Michigan. That header, just pluck it on the cover letter and then draft the cover letter beneath that. Customize your materials. Again, reiterating what Mary Ellen said, that cover letter for Bethany Christian Services is going to look a lot different than the cover letter for Herman Miller, which is going to look a lot different than the cover letter for Ford. Largely, some of your experiences will be the same, but significant portions of it will have to be different and targeted. One thing I wanted to build on, Mary Ellen was talking about gaps. With the cover letter, one thing that I've found to be, I was going to say annoying is not the right word, because it's not like it's, one thing that I think is negative for you as a candidate to do is to really harp on shortcomings, or especially career gaps. And the best analogy I can think of is, and you may have taken this public presentations class with Rob Pocock, like I did when I was a student at Hope, but he just badgered us at the beginning of the class with never, when you're giving a toast at a wedding, when you're going up and giving a speech, never open it with a qualifier like, oh, I haven't prepared, or oh, I'm kind of nervous, so bear with me here. Once you start with a negative like that, it just lessens the impact that you can have. And same with a cover letter. It's okay if you have a gap. Lots of people have gaps, especially after the 08 or 09 recession. Lots of people have or will be having gaps soon, unfortunately, with the current economic situation that we're in. So you don't need to start with a shortcoming or a negative experience. Lead with your strengths. So your time will come to talk about the gap and what you did in the interim, and that's probably best suited for the interview, but don't waste your cover letter space on explaining what you think is a shortcoming. And obviously don't be overconfident. So the basic format, which I actually don't want to spend a lot of time on now, unless a lot of people have questions about it or strong disagreements, we can get into that in the questions session. But the Boerigter Center here at Hope has a awesome cover letter how-to guide and great resume resources as well on the Boerigter Center's website. We'll be sharing that with you once the presentation's done as well, so you have access to it. The really basic point that I wanted to cover is the outline. It probably can exceed 4 paragraphs with exceptions, but really it doesn't need to be more than 4 paragraphs. And that would be, how did you hear about the job? Share some relevant strengths or experiences for why you're qualified for the job. Another paragraph that highlights a different skill set or experience that you have that makes you uniquely qualified. Close it out, looking forward to hearing back from you, looking forward to being considered for this position, excited to be considered for this role, end it. So 4 paragraphs is all you need. Anything more than that risks getting overly wordy and minimizing the impact of the information you're sharing. So last slide, just wanted to cover how you're engaging the audience. You need to know the problem and be the solution, which I realize sounds like a terrible MBA bumper sticker. But what I'm getting at there is you should, when you're applying for a position, you should have done your research. You should know that by looking at the job description, maybe by talking to some friends at the organization, what pain points are they having? Address those specifically with the cover letter. That's how you write concisely in a way that captures their information. Show that you're unique and interesting, share some wow accomplishments. And then lastly, I thought I'd just share in terms of the different types of cover letters. There's obviously the traditional cover letter that we spent most of our time talking about, but I think you should take the same approach with other types of communications that are doing the same thing, introducing yourself, trying to capture an employer's interest so that they call you back. So that might be an email introduction, you're just emailing the HR director, or a Hope alum at some organization. That should not be a 1-page document telling your whole story. It should really be 2 paragraphs or so. And then even more brief would be a LinkedIn connection invite. Hey, Scott Travis would love to connect with you. I'm interested in X career and wondering if we can grab coffee sometime. Boom, that's it. So find ways to share your story in an interesting fashion and as concisely as you can. So that's the basics of cover letters.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Mary Ellen. We've got a couple questions that were submitted during registration, and this is a great time, attendees, to use the chat feature to enter some additional questions. But I've got 2 ready to go here. The first is kind of, when is it appropriate, either in the cover letter or resume, where do bulleted lists come in? Kind of, where should you use a bulleted list? Where shouldn't you?
Yeah, I think for a cover letter specifically, I'm not going to say you can't use bullets in a cover letter. You probably could. I think the bulleted information is, my opinion is that it's probably better in the resume. You certainly could get away with that in a skills section, a summary section, or in the actual bullets for the specific positions that you've had. You could, in a cover letter, you could have a paragraph that says, I've got a significant experience that's relevant, and here's an accomplishment that I had, and below is a summary of some other things that I thought might be relevant. I think it's just not what employers are looking for when they're looking at a traditional cover letter, though. So I'd steer away from a lot of bullets in your cover letters.
I would agree. I used to read cover letters as a hiring manager to see if people could write, frankly, because I know I'm going to see a lot of bullet points on their resume.
Great. We've got a question about how to get your resume through an automated system so it can be seen and read by a human.
So that one's really tricky. And I think there's really no formula. But I would highly encourage tailor that cover letter. Many times we hear people say, it just takes too long to write these. I need multiple versions. It should be your full-time job to write these things. So using keywords from the job description or a fellowship description, internship description, typically are what the recruiter is going to put in their system to say, we're flagging for these types of keywords. So you almost kind of look at Mary Ellen's slide on where their eyes are drawn. Those are types of keywords. So if the job description saying, we're looking for somebody who is a great communicator, I'm going to use communication and language around that somewhere in that resume and somewhere in that cover letter, because both documents do get seen by that automated system. But take the time to tailor. Don't use the same intro and the same closing and change up your argument paragraphs. Really take the time to craft that document. I always say start with 3 different versions: a very creative version, a very analytical version, and more of a generic version. And from writing those 3, you can craft more documents from that.
And the only thing I'd add really quickly, I think that's great advice. The only thing I'd add is don't, if you're watching this seminar, this webinar now, thinking that you can rely purely on your resume and cover letter to get through an automated system, and that's how you're going to get your job, you might be disappointed, because I think your professional network, and this is a good segue to Megan, but your professional networking experience is going to complement the efforts that you're doing with resumes and cover letters. So if you're trying to build the best strategy to beat the automated system, I don't think anybody's really figured that out yet. I think good old-fashioned networking at the end of the day will get you in the door.
Great. Thanks. So do your research, look at industry-specific keywords, bring those in, but continue to network as well. Good question, Evan. Next question is from Ashley. Should work experience on a handshake profile, LinkedIn profile be more brief or less so, or sorry, more brief or more detailed than on your resume? So do you online on LinkedIn go into more detail or less?
So it's really up to personal preference. My professional recommendation would be to make sure that your digital profiles are slightly different from your documents. You have an opportunity on those virtual platforms to bring those things to life. You can showcase a portfolio of your work. You can take a bullet point and write a more narrative style on those virtual platforms and really help your reader grasp the impact that you were having. So sometimes that is a little bit more detailed. Sometimes that could be a little bit more brief. So you just kind of have to set the standard with where your documents lie and kind of work backwards. But again, going back to that tailoring and branding, which we'll make sure our first webinar that goes into a lot of great detail with tips on this is sent to everyone. But use that opportunity, use those platforms as an opportunity to brand and bring what can be very dry bullet points sometimes to life.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. We've got one more question in, and attendees, feel free to keep adding them in the chat throughout. But the next question is someone that's interested in translating academic, research, or graduate school experiences to an industry application. Using kind of the resume and cover letter. So tips on making that jump.
So I would say that your little bullet points for your graduate school, let me make sure I understand, Scott. Was it to apply to grad school or to leverage after grad school?
To leverage after, so
To
someone that
leverage after, okay.
has
So
academic, yep.
yeah, so same formula, right? So talk about the challenges you were facing, the actions you took, and the results you obtained. Those should be, that's how you tell a story to be most effective. And I would do the same. And maybe that's a different section header in terms of research accomplishments or papers you've written. But I would use sort of that same brief story style description.
And
Awesome.
find the most relevant experience that you can too. So let's say you're coming out of grad school, or maybe it's a college professor or somebody that's worked as a high school teacher, high school government teacher for 4 or 5 years. If you've on the side, if you've ever had a side hustle, or even if it was some sort of volunteer effort where you did a consulting project for an operations manager at Herman Miller and helped them work through some sort of data analytics, make that an entire paragraph or two part of your cover letter. Even if it's only 1% of your professional experience, that's enough to capture the attention of the hiring manager in a cover letter, and again, get the interview. That's the goal with this.
I would add one last thing would be make sure to explain the technical, because a lot of times when you're doing research, your research like statement is going to be so over that person's head. Put it in layman's terms so it's very approachable language, but know when you do the interview, someone that really understands your field and the industry, you can be using that technology language or more technical research language. But somebody in human resources is going to read that first, and they're fairly knowledgeable, but if you can just put it as very approachable language, if you have heavy research background coming from a PhD area, that's really helpful.
Okay, one more question on resume and cover letters here, then we'll move over to virtual platforms. When applying to graduate school, how long should I keep volunteer experience on my resume?
Well, it's probably going to fall at the bottom of your resume, so it's probably not going to be seen by everyone. If you don't have room, I'd take it off. If you feel like it's highly relevant to the program you're trying to get into, it maybe could move up into your education section somehow, or up into your accomplishment section.
Also look at the mission of the program or the mission of the institution. If it's highly philanthropic in nature, they're using servant leadership all over their website. That's a really good like keyword to capitalize on, and philanthropic stuff should remain on. But make sure that it's also unique philanthropic. Like there's a lot of organizations that many people participate in. So there's an opportunity to showcase what makes you unique. And maybe like, did you fundraise like over $1,000 for that cause? That could be something to highlight. So not only the challenges that Mary Ellen was talking about, but the impact can be important to sell in that philanthropic space.
Great, well, thank you attendees for great questions, and panelists for sharing your information. We're going to move into our last topic of the webinar with virtual networking platforms. Megan?
Awesome, thanks, Scott. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen as well. So again, just want everyone to know, we're gonna make sure that you have these slides and all the different resources available to you post-webinar. You're gonna have all the helpful links that we're showcasing today there too. So we hope this can be a really helpful time for you. So I'm going to be talking about virtual networking platforms that we recommend. There's 2 right now that I'm going to cover, but we also have one called Handshake. Handshake is our job posting platform. This is where you can schedule an appointment, which we will cover as well. But I'll start with these 2. So the Hope College Connection is a brand new resource we launched in January to our alumni. So still being fairly new, there's around 2,000 people that have joined. So that is great news for us. We are so happy that our alumni really grasped onto this tool. We also have one that's widely known called LinkedIn. So you might be in that category of having a LinkedIn profile, but you haven't joined the Hope College Connection yet. While I'm not going to go into extreme detail on how to use each of these platforms, I highly recommend, again, checking out that first webinar where we go into a little bit more detail. So starting with the Hope College Connection, this is what I'm calling your internal foot forward. So this is the internal Hope community, current Hope parents, and friends of the college. LinkedIn is your external foot forward. This is going to be engaging with other alums, but more importantly, those employers and recruiters. So all that to say, they're both powerful networking tools that can be used simultaneously. The Hope Connection, what makes that a little bit different from LinkedIn is this is where you can also give back to students. So if you're working full-time and you would just love a student to shadow you, want to give them advice on work-life balance or resume feedback, this is a great way you can also connect with our students or volunteer for our Discover Work job shadowing program. Again, we're going to share resources with you, but the Hope College Connection has a resources section that has all the curated guides that the Boerigter Center has put together. One cool feature that I really love about the Hope College Connection is there's a map feature, and you can go in by a certain zip code or geographic area and search for people within your industry that you're looking to apply in. So that's a really cool feature that LinkedIn doesn't have. And then again, you can get career advice from fellow alums or pay it forward to our students. This platform can also notify you via text message and has a Skype-like feature built in, so you can set up virtual meetings as well. So it's your one-stop shop to connect with the Hope community for whatever you're looking for. There's also some Hope faculty in there too if you're looking to reconnect. Hopping over to LinkedIn, this is where you can really be in touch and in tune with your industry. There's so many different companies that you can be following on the platform, see jobs they're posting, new partnerships. It's a great way to find information to bring up in an interview. This is going to be stuff that's not necessarily directly on their website. So it's a great way to do some research on different companies as well as their employees. It's a great way, again, to maintain a Rolodex of contacts, and I highly recommend going back into that Rolodex every so often and seeing who else you can connect with. By customizing your URL on LinkedIn, it's going to help your name rank higher in Google. Always assume that hiring manager or recruitment team is going to Google you. When there's an exact keyword search of your name, it's going to go up higher on Google. So our, LinkedIn's going to come up over our Instagram. But know your industry. Maybe Instagram's where your industry is living. So it's really important. Anytime you can customize a URL, do that. Also, again, like we mentioned, it can help you build your brand, or if you're rebranding, changing industries, it's a great opportunity to do that. And then there's also a job board on LinkedIn. I will tell you, I don't feel LinkedIn's job board is the strongest, but it's a great place to start. One advantage, it'll actually show you people who you may be connected to or have an affiliation like Hope alum that are also working or have worked at that organization. So it's a great place to start to tap into that network. But again, I will emphasize Handshake is a great platform that we vet the position that go into, and any Hope alum or employer that just loves Hope that's looking to hire somebody, we direct them directly into Handshake there as well. So as you look at your virtual platforms, be aware that there's some best practices. First one, clean up and update your virtual presence. I can't tell you how many times I've gone onto LinkedIn and has seen somebody that I want to connect with, and as soon as I go to their page, I can tell they haven't touched this in a year, if not longer. So make sure your profile's cleaned up to date with your current work experience, and this is an opportunity for you to clearly communicate your ideas, so it can be great writing samples for an employer. So make sure that's all up to date. The biggest one that I see on LinkedIn, and honestly with the Hope College Connection, is make sure your headline accurately represents you and your employment. If you're currently not working there, make sure that's not in your headline. I see this a lot with our students that are transitioning, but sometimes young alums just forget because they're in their first job, they're in their flow. Go back in and make sure you change that headline. One best practice I'm seeing in the marketing and advertising field is people are changing their headline almost every other week. It's engaging because it makes it different as a user logs in, and I'm going to go back to their profile. Be proactive on any platform you're using. One goal could be following 5 to 10 professional contacts that maybe you don't know yet. What platforms are they using the most? Go there, wherever that industry is living. And then look for any appropriate opportunities to share any content to those people that they might find intriguing. It's a great way to reach out and stay connected. Providing value. So take the time to locate valuable information and share it with a connection, and something that might resonate with their business or their industry can be a great foot forward. Again, building your personal brand, that draws people to you. A key thing to note here, speak with your audience, not at them. When something is more conversational, people feel like you are talking right to them, you're engaging them, and it's relevant. So people want to feel like you're speaking with them, not at them. And then again, it takes 1/10 of a second for someone to make a decision about you. So make sure that you have a professional photo. Doesn't need to be a professional headshot. There's some great iPhone photos I've seen, but make sure it looks like you. So for example, if I wore glasses every day, I'm probably going to have a photo that I wear glasses in. So just like an interview, if they go to your LinkedIn profile, then you come in for that in-person interview, I want to make sure that's the same person. So maybe you need to update your photo every so often. We all have that photo that we love of ourselves, but maybe it's 5 years from 5 years ago. So make sure you update that. And a couple other things here. LinkedIn has a feature where you can write an article. So it's very similar to any blog platform that you might put, but then it's accessible to the whole LinkedIn audience. So if you are trying to get your name out there or your stance on your industry, maybe you're starting your own business, write articles. It's a great opportunity to showcase your work. Those also get linked to your profile. So there's a great advantage for a recruiter to see that and follow up with you as well. Again, using keywords that are industry specific, you can use those from a job description. That's great stuff to do on your resume, cover letter, and those profiles. And then use your summary on any of these platforms as your time to shine. Maybe it's expanding on your headline. Maybe you've taken the strengths assessment and you want to expand on those things. So take some time to fill out that summary. Now, that's not going to be 2 paragraphs. That's maybe 5 to 7 sentences. Definitely not your whole life story, but it's like your first paragraph in your cover letter, something that's going to draw that audience in, that they want to learn more about you. So I developed, based on this source from buffer.com, some rules to implement. Now, these are rules that can easily be tweaked for no matter what you're doing, but go to your profile and challenge yourself to add content around these 7 areas. First, it's accurate. Professional descriptions. It's exciting. Uses some words that aren't super boring. It's targeted, so it's got a niche descriptor. Flattering, sell yourself, share an accomplishment. Humanizing, this could be a hobby. It's intriguing, an interesting fact or feature about yourself. And then connected, so showcasing your company or another social platform you want people to know about. So to give you a personal example, I pulled these from my LinkedIn account as well as some other platforms I'm using. So for accurate, I wrote helping students discern meaningful work through alumni connections. Now, my job title here is networking coach and program manager. I don't even like to use my title. I do a lot of explaining of what I do. So I said, okay, in 1 sentence, what do I do? And so that's where I put that. Exciting. So I use words like adaptable, flexible, eye for design. Targeted. So I work specifically with students and sometimes alumni. So I encourage students to identify their skills, interests, and values. Flattering. When I first started my career, I helped launch a Division II lacrosse program. I had played lacrosse in college, so I was living out my post-collegiate dream. Humanizing. So at Hope, we wear many hats, but I am the advisor to some amazing women in the Kappa Delta Chi sorority at Hope. Intriguing. Something that I have in common with some people is I was a first-generation college student. And then connected. Check out what I do. So go to my Facebook page that I help curate for the Boerigter Center for Calling in Career. So I'm going to pause there for any questions.
Megan, I haven't seen any come in the chat, but this is another reminder to do that. One that I have is when you think about applying for a position, where do you see some of these virtual networking platforms come in? Do you have any ideas on best practice on how to engage during as an applicant?
Sure. So one of the things you can actually do on LinkedIn, as well as Hope Connection, is search by the company, and then you can actually find employees at that organization. So maybe you want to reach out to someone in human resources. Maybe through a networking conversation, you can get in touch with the hiring manager. You don't want to be pushy like, hey, hire me, I'm applying. But maybe this is more of an informational interview around company culture, questions that you might get in an interview, feedback if you're targeting the industry appropriately, kind of getting insight into what can make you the best candidate and what you can really sell. Now, you want to be sure that that isn't rehearsed, that isn't generic. And so people at that organization can give you a lot of insight that you might not know. That could be something like they ask a lot of behavioral questions in an interview. That's going to help me prepare to be the best candidate. And then, like Mary Ellen mentioned, putting those links on your documents. So your LinkedIn account, you want to make sure is on your resume, put it in the signature of your email. So it drives people to the place that you want them to see because you've taken some time to boost up your brand.
Great, thank you. Next question is, a lot of these sites have premium levels. Do you believe those add significant benefit? Are they worth the money?
So I would say for LinkedIn, premium is helpful, but just for a short period of time in that application process, you might want to start with. So let's say the average life cycle right now is a 3-month period from applying to interviewing to hire. That's just an average with COVID. This could be longer, this could be shorter, depending on the company. I would probably err on the side of it being a little bit longer. So with premium features on LinkedIn, you can see how many applicants are applying for a certain position. Are they in a hiring freeze? So it gives you a lot of insight into the employer side. It also helps your name go a little bit higher in those searches for recruiters, so they can connect with you a little bit quicker. So I would say just when you're really active, when you're really ready to be applying, turn on that premium feature and use all the full capabilities. It is a little bit of money, but that's an investment you're making in yourself and in your future career. So they will pay off. So I would say think about it for 3 months, use it, turn it off, turn it back on. So yeah, I would highly recommend premium levels when you feel like you're ready.
Great. You mentioned LinkedIn's job board, but are there any other job boards you would recommend looking at? Are there some that are a favorite for any of our panelists?
So again, I'll harp on Handshake. It's a great place if you haven't been in there before. And again, it's very exclusive to Hope because we check on those positions as they're going in. And if a Hope person wants a Hope alum, we're sending them there. So that's an advantage. I also like Glassdoor. One of the cool things about Glassdoor is there's actually an interview section. So if you're going to go interview, let's say at Hope College, and I have recently interviewed at Hope, I can actually go on to the platform and share questions I was asked during the interview and insights into the application process. Many times employers do not change their questions dramatically, so that's a great way to prepare for an interview. The other features of Glassdoor, it rates their management, pros and cons, and gives them a score. So if you're looking for a strong company culture, Glassdoor is one that I would recommend.
I'll add to that with Indeed.com. I think it's a great site for job seekers that are maybe 0 to 10 years out of school. Certainly entry-level positions. It's very strong. I don't think their keyword search is fabulous, so you got to play with that quite a bit. But once you create a profile and put your resume in there, you can apply directly from Indeed.com. So that one's been pretty handy and successful for students lately. And then the other one that was just exposed to me this week is the Muse, which is MUSE, which is just a more fun site. It's more graphically appealing. They do a little more description of the companies, and I think the employers that are posting there are spending more time trying to lure applicants. So they do a nice job of presenting their opportunities.
Yeah, and if you have an industry or specific organizations you're interested in, keep those in a list and look on their websites. You can find industry-specific websites as well. So doing your research ahead of time can help, and always be looking for those. Those are all of our submitted questions. I'm going to share my screen for a few final updates here as we close out. We'll answer any other questions that come in, and we can send responses after as well for any that didn't get mentioned. So the first thing right away to mention is that the connections don't stop with these webinars. We can do appointments, we can do virtual appointments during this time, and also throughout the summer and in between semesters. So the way to do that is to get on the Handshake account like Megan mentioned. The URL is right here. There's an appointments section where you can pick the type of appointment and see a calendar right there of when they're available. If you run into problems with that, just send us an email at careers@hope.edu. That works as well. These resources you'll be able to click on in the version of the presentation that's shared with you via email after this. But we have how-to guides for all the topics talked about today, the Hope College Connection, which Megan mentioned, resources and using LinkedIn, and again, that link to Handshake. And finally, we wanted to say thank you for attending and for connecting with us in this way. During this time, if there's anything else that you need from your alma mater, feel free to reach out to any of us. careers@hope.edu or alumni@hope.edu are two different emails that you can remember to get in touch with. They both will get to the same place, and that's to get your questions answered and to get you connected. I'm going to check the chat really quick as we wrap up. Looks like we had a couple more come in. Just some thank yous. So thank you, everybody. We appreciate you as well, and have a great rest of your week. See ya.